How's it going, everybody? This is Brent Pritt with the first ever episode of the Science of Falling podcast. And with me, I have Edward Whitehead. He has a master's in education. So he is the master, as he likes to be called. And he is also a parkour instructor at the Maine Warrior Gym here in South Portland, Maine. What's going on, Ed?
Not too much, I think as is with everybody else right now, we're all kind of at home, like social distancing, not at the workplace. So it's a good opportunity to catch up and chat and, make sure everyone's like still alive and doing okay. Yeah.
Struggle bus, man. Struggle bus right now. I've been locked up for 2 weeks. I'm going crazy. So yeah, as we kind of talked about before we started recording, this is my new project, The Science of Falling. I'm making a website. I'm making a blog. I'm making a podcast. Hopefully it doesn't end up too bad. Nice house, man. Nice house.
Oh, thank you, yeah.
For those people listening, I am making a video of this too. So you can watch the recording if you want to see Ed's beautiful home he just bought and faces he's showing right now. So the whole thesis of this is learning how to fall from a PT perspective and why that's important for people to just kind of learn how to use their body. So Ed has the parkour instructor, expertise. I want to hear what he has to think about that.
I think it is my personal belief that parkour is the future of fitness in the respect that it is so practical and applicable to so many different ways of moving. Like we were kind of talking a little bit before we started recording, how other sports don't, have that kind of aspect. Whereas like parkour is all encompassing, and you find it, actually in a lot of professional sports teams, they use kind of those kind of training practices to, reduce injury in their athletes and things like that. So, Manchester United is actually an example of that, where they had folks from Parkour Generations. It must have been about several years ago at this point, but they had some instructors teach their athletes how to fall and shoulder rolls and things like that, kind of like ukemi style stuff. And they decreased their injury rate by a significant margin. I forget the exact numbers. It was around 10%, which is a significant amount for a season. I'm pretty sure that's what the number was. It was a while ago since I read the study, but
all right, so Ed's saying somewhere around 10% is what we're thinking. That's awesome.
I think the way that it incorporates the whole body in, you're moving your whole body in a range of different diverse movements. I think, that just having, just knowing how to land properly, even if you're not jumping that far off the ground, just knowing how to load your muscles properly is going to save you a lot of grief, later down the road, because, you have improper jumping technique. You might not feel it now, but you might feel it in 10 years if you're jumping that way for 10 years. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's, in synopsis, it's, it's practical, it's useful, and it kind of teaches you proper movement mechanics, I think.
Awesome. Well, that's interesting that you bring up Manchester United, because for Americans who don't know who they are, they're the traditional football. Soccer, as we like to call it, correct? Right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I've never even heard that they had some sort of parkour instructors from Parkour Generations, you said, came out to them?
Yeah.
That's awesome, because to me, that's kind of that's the epitome of what parkour and the I don't want to say ukemi, because it's not traditional ukemi, but the parkour ukemi methodology of learning the fall. It's kind of that's the epitome of using it, is using it in a high risk situation, such as playing a game at such a high level. And learning to land. I mean, ACL tears, if you jump and you land awkwardly, that's an ACL right there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So just learning and refining those movements, and, learning the shoulder roll if you take a bad fall and come out of it. I've seen quite a few baseball players, actually. There's some videos online of baseball players who get tripped up somewhere, and then there's ones that fall flat on their face and they don't know how to get back up. And there's ones that roll out, perfect, safety roll, shoulder roll.
Yeah.
Get up and keep on running like nothing ever happened. They end up making the home run or whatever it is. So it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting. Let's talk about your instruction of that. So you work with kids and adults, correct?
Yeah, mostly kids, but adults as well, a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with you. I've been in your
Yeah,
classes. Have
yeah.
I been in your classes? I know I've done parkour with you. I don't know if I've actually been in
We've
your
trained
classes.
together. I don't know if it was like formally a class, but yeah.
Yeah, same thing. So tell me about that. I mean, you're taking a kid, right? Let's start from the very beginning. You're taking a kid that's
Sure.
never done parkour, may have issues in their movement. They're not very coordinated. How do you kind of go about teaching them these roles and kind of explaining to them, if you do, the importance of them?
Well, I think the thing to consider too is that there is no average person, right? You know, like
Mm-hmm.
average is kind of a myth, right? Where like it's based on a bunch of data, and you know you accumulate it all together, and sure you get an average. But if you're looking, you know, at 5 people in front of you, there's not going to be like one average person in that. So basically, whenever I start a new like session of classes with a new like cohort of students,
Mm-hmm.
I'll kind of give them like pretty like basic fundamental drills, and I'll show it to them first, and pretty low risk stuff, and I'll be like, all right, try to copy that, and then I kind of get like a baseline of where they're at, and then if I'm finding like, oh, okay, like they're picking this up fairly quick, then that kind of dictates the speed of how I can like throw stuff at them. If they're kind of moving kind of more slowly, or there are challenges that I observe in their movement, then I have to take a step back and be like, oh, okay, so like maybe we do have to spend a bit more like time like going over like the finer nuances of those movements. And like it's like I'm not like having them like do wall flips on their first day, but like like I'll have them like maybe try a step vault or precision jump. Folks who aren't familiar with parkour terminology, you're like going up and over a box with your step on a foot with one hand on the other side, precision jumping on a balance beam, that kind of thing. And then besides that, once you get into it, it's all about progression, right? So you have to, it's really important, especially as you go up to the higher like echelons of parkour movements, that you have to break it down and look at it in its constituent parts, and you drill those until they're like perfect. And then once you've mastered that progression, only then can you go on to the next progression and figure that out. Because if there's any kind of break in the chain, so to speak, it kind of you're kind of setting. It's a difference between setting a good foundation of a house and then building a house on sand, right? So like on the top of the house, it looks great, but if it's like built on sand and then you have a rainstorm and you're not prepared for it, whereas if you have solid foundations underneath, if you have slightly imperfect conditions, you still have that foundation laid there, so you can carry through with that movement in an effective manner. If that makes sense.
Makes 100% sense.
Yeah.
So going with the kind of ukemi and the falling, how much of that base of the house do you think really plays into it?
That's a really good question. I think with the parkour role, I think it kind of depends. I think
before you keep going, explain the parkour role, because I don't think people hear parkour role, they have no idea what you're talking about. Kind of give them a sense of what that is.
Okay. So the parkour shoulder roll or a break fall roll. Excuse my accent if you can't hear what I'm saying, but it basically what it is you're landing on the balls of your feet, and then you're drawing a line across the diagonal of your back, kind of starting from up by like the shoulder blade on the back across to your hip. It's kind of referred to in some circles as the soft tissue pathway, where
I call it meat to meat personally. Focus on going meat to meat.
Meat to meat. Yeah, that's that sounds better. It's more ring to it. You're trying to like go over your shoulder, and basically the idea is that you're increasing the time that it takes for you to get to a full stop, thus diminishing the impact force of that landing. So it's kind of like the difference between slamming on the brakes and getting whiplash versus gently pushing on the brake pedal, coming to a slower but gentler stop.
I love it. That was beautiful explanation.
Yeah.
So sorry for interrupting. Carry on.
No. I think it's definitely the parkour role is probably the easiest skill to learn, but it's the hardest to master, right? Because there's a lot that goes into it when you start messing around with different applications of it. You know, you can use it to go over obstacles. It can, you know, when you start messing with different heights, you know, the timing of when you initiate that roll changes as well. So, you know, it's effective around, you know, the highest I've seen folks really jump is around like 12 feet. And that, you know, and that also depends on, you know, how much you weigh, like how much muscle mass you have, how, you know, there's this concept in parkour called body armor, right? And it's like, you know, you're building muscular mass because if you have more elastic body tissue, there's more force that you can dissipate, basically. So, I mean, the highest I've ever done a drop to a shoulder roll is around 10 feet. And that's kind of like pushing it, you know.
Which
like,
is, I mean, people see these, you know, parkour athletes on YouTube do it, and it seems like it's nothing. It's no joke. I think I've done 8 feet, and I felt a nice little tremor through my body when I landed. And I mean, I think you were there when my buddy actually ended up breaking his leg on a 4-foot mat.
Oh God, yeah, yeah,
yeah. So that mean like, and he was on a 4-foot. No, it's not 4 foot, 3 foot, probably like a 3-foot thick mat, and he still broke his leg. So it's the technique, really, if you do it correctly and you got the body armor, like you're telling me,
yeah,
it works. It's a magical how much reduction in force you can create.
yeah. It's all about the timing of it, really. Like, you want to be hitting on the balls of your feet, and then you want to be initiating that roll, you know, almost immediately after that, because if you stick the landing, you know, even for like a fraction of a second and then go into the roll, your body's already absorbed all that impact. So it's one of those things that is invaluable to practice over and over and over and over in different types of, you know, heights and angles and things like that, because you want to be able to prepare yourself, you know, for a worst case scenario, right? You want to be able to, you know, if you biff a jump or something, or you know, you find yourself in a burning building, for instance, and you have to like do a drop. You know, you want to be able to be prepared for that. But I think, you know, in terms of like general parkour, you know, it is an important skill to learn, just in that you have this kind of exit strategy if something doesn't work out. And, you know, if you want to be not just training it going forwards, but also backwards, you want to be training it, you know, in, you know, a novel application, right? So you want to not just practice it going forwards, but also going backwards, sideways, at different angles, over different shoulder, things like that. So that, say, you know, you do a backflip and you're over rotating, you're able to, you know, you land on your feet, but you still got backwards momentum coming this way. You're able to, like, you know, roll out of it effectively and cause yourself minimal injury.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in that. I think I fall more often than I would like to, and I've somehow always I've gotten pretty good at ukemi because I fall so much. So, I mean, I'm with you on that. You definitely got to be able to think on your feet. And I think that's one of the most important things, and that's kind of the main premise of what I'm trying to push with this kind of project, is that we shouldn't wait to learn how to fall until we're in a high risk category, even though I think we should. A lot of PT places now don't teach how to fall. They teach how to be strong and how to have your balance. But as we both know, living on the East Coast right now, a patch of ice, some sort of loose gravel somewhere can send you to your butt real quick. And if you don't know how to fall, no matter how much balance or strength you have, it could end up bad. So like the parkour methodology you're learning as a kid, like we were talking about originally, I feel like it just ingrains it so much where it's second nature. I've had situations where I've been walking upstairs and I trip and I just end up in a shoulder roll without even thinking about it. I don't know if you've had any real life experiences like that, but
I'm trying to think.
You might be more graceful than I am.
Actually, there was a time in high school where I was we were taking decorations down from like a winter formal, like dance gathering kind of thing. The ladder that I was on, I was like reaching to something, and the ladder like I was kind of like, if you can imagine, I'm like facing a ladder like this, and I'm like reaching back like that to try and grab something, and the ladder like overbalanced this way, and it started tipping this way.
Oh no.
And then so I'm like, oh well, then this is happening. So I pushed off, landed into a roll. Like it wasn't like perfect, but I was, I didn't break anything. So it was, having that kind of training to be able to do something like that and kind of save yourself is invaluable, I think, to a lot of different careers. And even if you're not like an athlete, like just like knowing how to fall is really important. And as you say, like especially in New England, in states like Maine, Vermont, there are people, as an older population, right?
Much older.
So, yeah. So like just understanding basic body mechanics of how to fall. But I think there's other stuff that plays into that too. With like weight bearing exercise and stuff. Being able to keep up your bone density and things like that. The adage of move it or lose it is very applicable, especially as you get older, because as people get older, they tend to slow down, and that's kind of like where you see more injuries happening. So I think the combination of those two elements is super important in injury prevention, especially as you get older.
Mm-hmm. That's one thing I've been trying to figure out, because a lot of these, from a PT perspective, when you have a patient coming in, they already have a fall risk. Like they already either had falls, or they've almost had falls, or they have some sort of like vestibular inner ear thing going on, or any kind of neurological disease. Taking them where they're at and trying to incorporate fall training into it is a little difficult. You have to figure out the best way to do it, and sometimes it's not going to be perfect. And I guess I want to pick your brain on how would, with the older adults you've trained with or trained, kind of comparing the children in their learning aspect of how well they pick it up, and what are the different strategies you might use with an older adult?
I think, the biggest difference between kids and adults, aside from the physical ones, is kind of attitude towards this kind of stuff, right? As a kid, you kind of have this, well, I won't speak for all kids, but most kids have this idea of like being invincible, right? Or at least being ignorant to the fact that they could ever get hurt doing any of this kind of stuff, whereas adults, they've had all this experience throughout their lives where, maybe they have had an injury here, maybe they did play sports when they were younger and they injured themselves, or, especially coming into a PT office, I'd imagine that, folks aren't walking in because, they got out of the right side of the bed in the morning. They're probably coming in because they have an injury, right? So, in the same way, we have a lot of people come into our gym, they have like goals of like weight loss and stuff. Maybe they have like high blood pressure, things like that. So they have, these, we'll say they're like at risk, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of have to change your attitude towards how you might train that. So like with a kid, you're trying to be like, yeah, this is fun and exciting and woohoo, like we're being ninjas or whatever. Whereas like, working with adults, you kind of have to meet them more at their level a little bit and kind of show them like, oh, it's not so bad, and a lot of things in parkour, it's like, as going back to what we were saying, it's all about that progression. And like with an adult, like who, let's say they've like had a fall and they've injured themselves in some way, it's about stretching out those progressions a little bit and like finding more intermediary steps to kind of make that transition a little slower, so that you're building like a super solid foundation and being able to see how that translates a little bit more readily, just because there's more steps in that process.
Yeah. Do you think, because I've read a lot of studies on falling in the last couple months to kind of prep for this Science of Falling project. There was one study that took a bunch of older adults and basically taught them how to fall, and they found that older adults were able to learn and learn well. And I think they were using like martial art techniques, which are similar to parkour, but I think parkour's made it a little more real world applicable. But in your experience, I know you have to piece it out for those progressions. Is it more of a mental thing for them, Is it a learning thing? Is it just getting their body up to that level of fitness? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on who you're talking to and who you're working with. But I think, if you're looking generally, it comes down to a couple of things. So it's interesting you bring up learning, right? Because, kids their brains are a lot more plastic, right? And that meaning that, they're able to learn stuff more readily. Whereas adults, their brains can sometimes be a bit more rigid, and they may be, I don't know if stubborn's the right word, but like, it's harder to learn new things, especially if you put in like that emotional piece, right? Where like, oh, that looks dangerous. I don't know if I'm, ready for that. And it's, it's interesting, like how, or like where you might see that. So like you take someone like who's, 15, 16, tell them to jump up onto like a 2-foot box and do a box jump, no problem. But if you get someone who's like, 45, 46, they've been out of the game, so to speak, for a little bit, and you say, all right, jump on that 2-foot box. Their attitude is completely different. And that, I'm not saying that is for everybody, but just in like my experience, just using a recent example, you had to do some quick, like, your personality assessment of those individuals and kind of see like what they're comfortable with. And it's kind of, my approach to it is kind of like, I'll give them different options of things to do. So like I'll run a class and, there are different skill levels within that class. And I'll have like, either it's a drill or a route. And I try to have like an easy, medium, and hard option to try and like challenge folks in. And, I'll run them through that. And, sometimes people will surprise themselves, they'll say, oh, maybe I'll try the intermediate one. And it was like easier than expected. And on the other side, sometimes too, we see like people like bite off a bit more than they can chew, and they're like, oh, I have to like back up a little bit and like figure it out. So I try to make things scalable so that people can kind of pick what they feel comfortable with, and if they often surprise themselves, I think, because it's as long as you're spending the time to go with them and say, be able to give constructive feedback and tell them like, this is good, this needs to change, etc. I think you have to be realistic too with those expectations. You want to be able to give them realistic options that they can work with. I think. I don't know. I was rambling a little bit towards the end there, but
no. But if I'm going to try to like condense what you said, basically, it comes in all three kind of things. It's a mental game for them. It's also learning, depending on if that skill's within their pre-existing wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And also it's a fitness thing. I mean, if you haven't moved in 20 years, I mean, I'm surprised from a personal training side. You have people who haven't jumped in 20, 30 years, depending how old they are. You have people who haven't ran in 20, 30 years. And getting them to do that can be mentally scary. And also mentally, they don't know if their body can get to that level ever again. They feel like it's my normal. I'm not going to be able to do it. So when you give them 3 different options and they do the easy one, it gives them a little boost. And they say, well, maybe I'll try the intermediate level. And all of a sudden they do it. And now you have a confidence boost. Their mental image of their self-fitness is higher now, and it allows them to open up a lot more doors. So whereas as a kid, you don't have those pre-existing thoughts in their head of, oh, I can't do that. They see something, they've been told their entire life they can do whatever they want until they're like 10, and then that dream's crushed by their teachers.
Right. Yeah.
And then they just do it. And who cares if they get hurt? They don't think about it because they're so bendable and malleable anyway. They're going to roll out of it on accident. If that kind of condenses what you're saying. I mean, it's there's a lot of factors.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, how would you? I'm curious about this because parkour has a bad stigma. I mean, there's younger generations. Me and you look at it as not only a workout, but it's playing for us. When we got the whole gym or outside area, we look around and it's a creativity. Like it's almost like someone who has a painting and they're about to paint a masterpiece. We look at it and say, oh, I could do that. I can jump over this. I can jump to there. Blah blah. It's us playing around, and then you have a 50-year-old adult walking by and say, look at these wackos jumping on stuff like they're children. So how would you, if you had to, say you're in a PT clinic, right? You got you're a licensed PT, you're trying to, you're in my position, you're trying to figure out how to get an adult who's fall risk to want to learn how to fall and not be scared of it and look at it as something positive instead of something that they might possibly get hurt with. How would you mark that? How would you make it kind of fun, or however you want to do it?
It is a big issue, similar to skateboarding culture. I think Instagram has had a huge impact on parkour community in the sense that, like, you see like the folks that get the most views and hits and stuff are those who are doing the craziest things. And I think, when you're talking to people, and certainly when I talk to people, like, I don't know, like I'll pop a wall flip or something and they're like, oh, that's amazing. Like I could never do that. And, I tell them the story of like, where I started to learn that. And there's like 10,000 hours of training that's gone into that before that point, at least,
Mm-hmm.
So like, it's something, it's important to recognize that, it all starts from somewhere. Right. And, you have to start super, super small. So going back to like, those folks are talking about who haven't jumped in 20 years, we start with jumping. And even if it's like, jumping like a couple inches in front of you, just like starting with that, I think you had to kind of try and separate the activity from the culture a little bit. When you're looking at it in that kind of application, I think it is difficult, I think, because parkour does have questionable legality to it sometimes. If you're in the US, it's a kind of a unique situation because there's no real like public property. It's all owned by someone, right? So if you get hurt, they're liable for it. Whereas like you go to places like, Canada, the UK, there are places where it is public. But there are other sides, in the UK, where there are places where they literally have no parkour signs, and it's crazy. Yeah. So, I think you have to be objective about it, right? I think, if you're using it in like a PT application, you remind folks like, we're not teaching you how to jump off of buildings, but if you trip, this is how you might, this could save you from spraining or breaking your ankle or something, I think, it is a tricky one to answer. I think, like you and I obviously know the benefit of the activity. I think it's something that, the attitude towards parkour can't be fixed overnight. I know like there are some groups that will, they'll go out training and either before or after they train, they'll do like a garbage pickup. They'll like take trash bags out and they'll clean up the space and make sure it's clean as a gesture of goodwill, saying like, listen, like we're here to be constructive. We're here to do something, that's bettering our bodies and ourselves. We're not vandals. We're not trying to, be public menaces. It's really important about how you market yourself as an athlete. You want to not give off the impression that, you're a juvenile delinquent, right? You want to, respect, like, if someone tells you you can't be there, you can't be training, you have to listen, you have to, be polite about it. I think, the image of parkour, certainly hasn't been helped by folks like Ali Law and like the sort of crane climbers and stuff. That kind of gets lumped into being as parkour, where it really isn't. Like a lot of stuff, parkour is trained on a lot closer to ground level, because with the exception of like stuff you see like in London and maybe Paris, like a lot of roofs are pretty boring to be on because they're flat and like, there's not a lot to do anyway.
True.
So you're going to find more interesting things closer to the ground to train on. So there's that misconception. But with like the crane things, it's all about being controversial, right? So like it's about, and they're like trying to like get the police to come and run away from the police and things like that. And that definitely gives parkour a bad rep. for sure. Because the general public doesn't, they see someone like climbing around in a building, it's like, oh, that's parkour, but it really isn't.
It's someone bouldering is what they term it when you're climbing on buildings, kind of like bouldering, right?
But it's like, it's not even that. It's like, this dude just like climbs up a ladder on a crane and like has a GoPro and he's like, check it out, we're here, like we shouldn't be here, kind of thing. And it's just all about like getting the likes on YouTube and Instagram. And I think that's like, as moving forward as a sport, that's probably one of the biggest challenges is like, how do we sell ourselves to the general public in a way that's constructive, saying like, listen, we're just trying to better ourselves, we're not trying to hurt anybody, we're not trying to damage property. And I think a big part of that, a big thing especially in Europe and other places that has helped with that is the introduction of things like parkour parks, where people have dedicated spaces to train, kind of like with skateboarding, things like that. Being able to have that and see people use that as a designated training space, I think helps. But then you have folks, and I love Stora and what they do, but you have like folks still jumping around on buildings. It kind of like exacerbates that, in the sense where like, well, you guys have this space to train now, why are you still doing this? It's like, it's almost like it's worse because now it's almost like they don't have an excuse. So
it's interesting to me because I'm gonna bring this back to PT in a second and how you do in the clinic, but it's interesting because you say store. I remember, and there are parks and they have all, I think doesn't store have their own gym, like parkour gym or something like that? I think.
No, I think they're in the process maybe of making one.
Okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, they obviously have gyms they can train in around there. But it's interesting, even if you have a place to train, the heart of parkour is supposed to be moving through your environment from A to B, right? Point A to point B as fast as possible, and that really wasn't, inspired in the cityscapes and getting out there and doing it. So that's kind of where the heart of it is. But at the same time, it creates this stigma, and it's interesting because one of my favorite store videos I've ever watched before was I think you might have saw this one where they're trying to race the subway across town. Yeah. And so, the friends get on one point and they have to race all the way across town to get into the subway at the other point on the same exact train. It was insane. It was amazing. It was pure parkour and I loved it. And it wasn't anything outrageous. It was just moving as fast as possible through the environment. They did some crazy stuff during it because they're skilled, but it's that kind of stuff that, I'm almost, in my project for this, is kind of fighting an uphill battle because you have the parkour stigma. So if I use that word, and I've already used it in my first article that I've been writing, automatically people will have this switch in the brain that it goes negative, right? And then secondly, I'm trying to get not only young adults, because I want everybody to kind of practice falling, but older adults who have actual fall risk to engage in this practice to make sure that when they do fall, because it's inevitable, everybody's going to fall at some point in their life, whether they want to or not, that they minimize the injury as much as possible. So I'm finding this uphill battle on both fronts. And it's weird that it's such a movement culture like parkour that is so beneficial in its like core principles, especially to this patient population I'm trying to marry these two things that have nothing to do together, basically. It's hard that you have to fight against that stigma, and these people that are doing these crazy things for the likes on YouTube, and maybe that's just a social media culture that we're living in. It's everything's supposed to be outrageous. It's just interesting, man, because I look at things as like, if you want to get something done, you look at the best people that can do it. So if you want to get lean and shredded, you look to bodybuilders. They may not be doing it the healthiest way, so you want to talk to a dietitian if you want to do it healthy. But like if you want to get shredded and see your muscles and striations like nobody's business, you look at how bodybuilders are doing it. If you want to fall and not get hurt, look at parkour, athletes, because they're doing it the best. I mean, martial arts are doing it. They've been doing it thousands of years, but they're also using mats. They're also being thrown directly to the ground. They're not walking and tripping all of a sudden like some, a 60-year-old lady might be doing. Parkour, we can figure out how to, if I fall and trip, I know 6 different ways to get out of it. So it's an interesting thing because it's the stigma. It's the perfect thing for these patients, but I'm fighting uphill about it because of the stigma, just like you're talking about.
I think with that, you have to use examples of where parkour has been beneficial to society at large, right? I think the sort of proto parkour, the natural method that was started by Georges Hebert in the late 19th century. He studied natives of French Indonesia. I hope I'm saying that right. I know he was in a colony of France at the time, and he was like studying how like the native folks moved, and he wanted to like encapsulate that and bring it back to France. And basically all like military emergency service personnel, like firefighters, policemen, they're trained in this natural method, right? And parkour, the word parkour is actually derived from the French expression parcours du combattant, which it basically means obstacle course, right? Or like an assault course, right? It's used in so many applications already that people don't even know about, right? So you look at like even if you're not selling it directly as parkour, you can say like, listen, like check it out, like parachuters, like paratroopers, they like do shoulder rolls like when they land out of like parachutes and things to like lessen their impacts. Proper jumping mechanics are going to help you like avoid knee problems in the future, right? I think of I'm trying to think, what was I going to say? It was trying to think of another like positive example of like where parkour, I mean, like the work that Parkour Generations did back in the UK kind of they were the first folks who kind of figured out how to teach parkour to people. And that was like back in like the early 2000s, like around 2005, 2006. And, they basically, the way that they formatted that was, it was like taking kids off the street basically. And, there have been sociological studies on this where like, the kids, maybe they were involved with drugs or things like that. And then, they gave them like parkour to do. And, there was a decrease in, crime in that area. I've had the opportunity myself to work with underprivileged youth, in Vermont and a little bit in Maine, not too much, but mostly in Vermont when I was still living there. Yep. And, they various different ailments, be them like, like emotional behavioral or like, they're on the poverty line, things like that. And, giving them something like constructive to do. That's parkour is so individually focused, right? It's about the betterment of yourself, not trying to, competition has recently just come up on the scene, but I think the heart of parkour philosophically is trying to find the way that you move, right? And it being able to navigate your own environment. And I think it's down to like you can kind of like show people kind of like give them suggestions and things, but it's about encouraging them how they want to move themselves and help them find ways that they want to move, versus trying to like push it on them. I think it's interesting to see because, being kind of like a fringe activity, I think it kind of, it attracts kind of oddball people like myself, like to this kind of activity, right?
Ed is a weirdo, everybody. Ed is a strange man.
Right. I was never too, I don't know, like I played rugby a little bit when I was in England and I got into other sports and martial arts and things like that. But just like there's something, that I can own myself, that it's about competition with yourself and making yourself better, right? And I think coming back to like, your original question, like how do you convince someone that this is a good idea to learn it? I think it comes down to like the statistics, right? You show them the data, you show them like examples where it's been useful for other people. You talk about like how that might apply to your situation, being the patient situation, and going from there. I think.
Yeah, I've like I said, I read a lot of studies on falling and whatnot, and most of them were based around martial arts. But there was one study, it wasn't necessarily falling, but it was based on parkour. And it was talking about the person's perception pre-learning parkour techniques and post-learning parkour techniques. And I believe it had to do with climbing a wall. And I think it was like a 6 or 7 foot wall or something like that. But it was basically the people before they learned any sort of parkour technique looked at this wall and thought it was impossible. After learning techniques, they said, oh, I could probably do it. I have a lot more, self-efficacy in terms of I have the power to make this happen. And I feel like, I mean, as much as that was only about climbing walls, I feel like that's the same thing with, falling. Once someone buys into it a little bit, they learn it, all of a sudden this whole new world pops open. Just like you were saying earlier with the three different, skill levels of an obstacle course. It's the same thing. It's mental game that they got to build up and find that inner power, I guess.
It's interesting that you bring that up about like people's perceptions, right? Because fear is such a big part of parkour, and falling,
Huge.
right? There are two, to my knowledge, there are two hardwired fears in the human brain. There's the fear of loud noises, and then there's the fear of falling backwards, right? And it's a really hard thing to navigate in the beginning of parkour, because you have this thing that's hardwired into your brain. It's like literally why we're here today is, evolutionarily speaking, it stopped us from, being, eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or something, or falling off of a cliff, and we're still in the gene pool. That's why we're here. So those progressions become really important, because what it's doing is it's training your amygdala, which is this tiny, like about yay big, it's in the back of your brainstem kind of thing. It's responsible for your fight or flight response, right? And the human brain is conditioned to not like anything that it's that is new or isn't familiar, right? And again, same thing. Why that is evolution, right? It's like kept us away from potential threats. So going back to those foundations, it's about training the amygdala to recognize each of those steps. So you start close to the ground, just getting that muscle memory down. Then you start with your hands in a diamond shape, putting down to the ground. Then you add a little bit of hop into it, then a little bit of height, then more height. And it's really, you're like essentially like laying like amygdala bricks, right? So you're like laying like brick by brick by brick by brick. So it's really important to not go into it too fast, because you lay a bad brick, it pushes all the other bricks down, and like psychologically, then you kind of have to start again.
Yeah, no, I get that, and it's interesting that you say that, because I remember I started parkour 3-4 years ago, something like that. And it was before I was living in California, as you know, and I was just getting ready to basically figure out where I was going to go for my doctorate in physical therapy, and I ended up going to Maine, where I'm at right now, talking to you. But man, going from one end of the country to the other is terrifying. And I remember doing parkour, and like every day I would go in when I first started. And I still get it every once in a while when I'm like actually training, which I haven't done in a while. But you get in there, and if you're doing something you haven't done in a while or haven't done ever, sometimes you actually get that frozen, like you can't move. Your heart's pumping really hard. You're just completely frozen. But it's so empowering once you get over that.
Absolutely.
And it's like you're laying those amygdala bricks, like you're saying, like you're getting that fear, but then you also have to train your body, so your body's in line with how much fear you can do. Because it's an interesting thing. I think the only times I've been hurt in parkour is when I either have no fear or I have too much fear. It has to, like, I have to be in between, because if I have too much fear, I lock up, and then I end up like posting arm and doing like a foosh injury. If I have no fear at all, I end up doing something stupid because I'm trying to keep up with the little kids that are around me doing stupid stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And like I've broken my finger because of that, because I no fear did something I shouldn't have been doing. And I think it's the same thing. Yeah, when someone's doing this stuff, you have to find that sweet spot, build them up, but also keep them in check.
Yeah, like humility is a huge part of parkour, right? Like you have to be able to, it's important to like, confidence is different from arrogance, right?
Yes.
Like being confident in your own ability, but also having the humility to understand like this is where I'm at. You can. It's not to say that you can be up here, but yeah, it's a difference of being delusional and thinking you're here, but you're not. When about maybe like 4 years ago, I had like a pretty serious injury myself.
Yeah.
And that was a situation, where I got cocky and I was basically trying to do a side flip over an object, and it didn't go right. I got caught up on it, and I had like a crash mat on the other side, but I kind of threaded the needle where I fell about 6 feet, like kind of onto the back of my left shoulder and the back of my head. And it just, onto concrete essentially. It was like like about like yay thick like rubber matting, but it might as well have been concrete at that point. I completely tore through my left AC ligament, partial tore of my CC ligament, and I had what's referred to as a breakthrough concussion. I had a seizure. I seized for about 2 minutes. I mean, the one fortunate thing about it really is that I wasn't conscious to see myself go through that, because I think if I had seen myself and like what I might have looked like based on what people told me I looked like, I may not be still doing doing parkour. But it was with this kind of stuff, especially if you're trying to sell it to someone as injury prevention, like you have to be super conservative in how you sell it to someone. So as an extreme, you wouldn't have an 80-year-old trying to do drops off of a 6-foot wall, and that that's a huge
that's
extreme,
the first exercise,
right?
man. First exercise, front flip off here, we're good. You got a vestibular issue, let's just go for it.
So humility is huge in this, and there's no shame in starting right at the very beginning. Sometimes like with kids even, I should say with kids, sometimes like, this is boring, why are we doing this? And then like, okay, well, like, let's try a couple more progressions into it. It's like, it's just too hard. It's like, I told you so, right? So reality checks like that, within reason, are good. It was, I mean, not to say that you should like throw yourself onto concrete from 6 feet up onto your head, but it was a huge reality check for me, because I was about, I think it was like 25, 26. I'm turning 29 this year. I know I'm getting geriatric at this point. Yeah. It was weird because, not only was it this super huge confidence setback, but, my brain chemistry was literally all over the place, after having a seizure and like a concussion and things like that. I was on Keppra for about 6 weeks as which is an anti-seizure medication, as a precautionary measure. And, it really, like, I almost had to like completely learn how to do parkour again, from the ground up. And it was interesting, going into that experience, with effectively like trying to rebuild the use of my left arm again. It was really painful for me to see like my left arm like actually like atrophy. Like, I could see my arm getting small. I'm like, oh no. But I have like full function of it. Now it took me a little while though. It took me like probably like 7 to 8 months for my body to be in kind of the condition it was before my injury. But the brain takes a lot longer. It was like 1.5 years before I started feeling anywhere close to normal again.
It takes a long time, especially when you have all the neurological issues going on and the whole arm's trashed itself from it. I mean, it's a long way back. Well, getting back, I mean, I'm just thinking of patients who fell and hurt their arm. How did you get back into doing those falling techniques? Because I mean, I think martial arts doesn't use the arm as much, but parkour uses the arm a lot to absorb in the shoulder and to basically, slinky down into a roll. How was getting back to that?
Like with the parkour roll, the arm is more kind of there to like guide, kind of guide you in that position. It's not really absorbing a lot of impact, because with any kind of drops, you won't really want to be thinking about your legs doing most of it, right? Because it's they support your own body weight already, so they're going to be better at absorbing impact than your arms would be ever. But I think it's important to have a solid PT regimen. I had a regimen where I was going into the clinic like twice a week. I was working on stuff like every single day, like with homework they would give me. And it is a matter of, really sticking to that plan. And then having the fire in your belly to get it back. There were a couple moments in that process, sort of closer to the beginning, I guess, where I was like, is it worth it getting back into parkour? Like, I could have died if it was like a foot taller or something. Like, what if I had broken my neck? Things like that, But I think, as from an athlete's perspective, this is my life, right? And now it is my livelihood, so it's really important. It was really important for me because it was so attached to who I am as an individual, like my identity. Like, it was like not like a question of like, if I can do this, it's like I have to do this because this is who I am, and I have to get back to being who I am.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. Especially, I mean, that's another huge thing in physical therapy is when you have an athlete and they get hurt doing something they love. Like, you're a high-level football player and they tear their ACL or they just blow out their knee. Is that person going to get back? And if they don't, it's pretty, I mean, like, psychologically, it messes you up because that's most people's identities, just like yours is parkour. I mean, if you don't have parkour right now, I wouldn't have met you if you quit, which would have sucked. But it's so much a part of you. Like, I mean, I don't go 2 or 3 days without seeing you put something up on Instagram or Facebook about you doing like a wall flip or doing something, parkour related. And I think that's also is a hard part too, because when you're getting a patient who doesn't have that movement background, they don't have that fire in their belly, like you were saying. And I think that's going to be something I'm going to be struggling with in the next year or two, trying to really figure out how to marry these two things and make it into a inviting package for someone who is fall prone to really want to be a part of.
Yeah, I mean, like, you could look at it in the perspective, or from the perspective that, maybe it's not like an athletic activity, but say like you have an older individual, they have grandkids, and the grandkids want to go to the playground and play, and you want to be able to play with your grandkids, right? Children, they're running around, they're rambunctious, things can happen, right? If you're like, be like the cool granddad or cool grandma that goes on the jungle gym with their grandkids, and you have that kind of safety net of being able to catch yourself if you fall, and having the not just like the physical competency, but the skill-based expertise to be able to catch yourself. You think of safety. Like parkour is not so much now, but like in a kind of, because martial artists kind of founded the practice, in teaching it, that it kind of became its own, martial art of escape, taking like elements of ninjutsu and kind of expanding on that, in terms of like, you can either fight or fly away, right? And parkour is the fly away part, right? Being able to escape dangerous situations, like older people, they're more vulnerable, generally speaking, to being preyed on by undesirable people and things like that, because typically, not to say for all older people, but they're at risk of that, because generally, like not as much strength, things like that, not going to put up as much of a fight. So if you being able to frame it in a way that's like, these are some activities that you can enjoy without any kind of anxiety. These are sort of good survival techniques just to know, in case you do find yourself in these kinds of situations. I think that's kind of like the way to sell it. You have to kind of find the motivator as to why you're doing it. I went to this clinic. There's a parkour seminar over at Hub Parkour Training Center down in Massachusetts. And this guy, Joseph Henderson, who is he's a Storm parkour athlete from Team Storm back in the UK. He did a seminar on fear, right? And when you're learning parkour, there has to be a reason why, right? You have to find your why, because you don't have to do a wall flip. There's no reason why you have to do a wall flip, right? Or there's no reason why you have to like front flip down these stairs. You could just take the stairs, right? You know, so like you have to find your own reason why, right? Otherwise, you're not going to motivate yourself to learn how to do it, because, you know, they are potentially dangerous things. So in the same way, you have to think about like, what is my why? Why am I doing this? What am I getting out of this? Why is this important to me? You know?
No, I agree. And I think bringing it back to the falling in terms of parkour and patience, I think, I mean, if a patient really thinks about it, learning to fall, there's a huge why behind it. Like you're saying, if they want to play with, if an older adult, they want to play with their grandkids. I mean, kids run around. They might trip you up. Something might happen. If you have a cane, a kid might come over and just sideswipe your cane out of you, and you might be going down. I've literally have had patients who give me that exact story, and they come in with like an ankle sprain, or they broke their wrist because their grandkid came over and just sideswiped them.
Kids
Cane
are
went out.
assholes,
They went.
aren't they?
I know, man. That's what I'm saying.
Oh man.
But it's so interesting. So I mean, like I like how you said that. You have to find your why, and you gave such a good example, a good reason why an older adult should. And I think younger adults and kids should learn how to fall correctly, just because, I mean, you got to make it second nature. If it's not second nature and you have a split second where you have to think about it, it's game over. Like you said, I mean, in a split second, your whole world can change. Yeah, no, I love it, man. Let's end right there. I mean, we're running up on time anyway, so let people know where they can find you, or if you want anything to promote, like, let us hear it. What you got?
Yeah, so if you're interested in learning a little bit more parkour, some acrobatics, some functional movement techniques, definitely stop by over at the Maine Warrior Gym when all this like COVID-19 stuff is all over and like our doors are open again to the public. Come by, stop by for one of our open gym sessions or a class. You can follow me on Instagram. I am at the_Ed_Ucator. So it's like the educator. So you can find some of my parkour clips on there too. The Maine Warrior Gym is rolling out a online 12-week parkour program as well, to have some materials to study from home. They're going to, a multitude of different resources. We're going to have mostly tutorials, but also like webinars and things like nutrition, mentality, things like that. I'll try to send that link to you, Brent. You can put it on your website when this goes up. We're still kind of in the finishing touches of like making that live for folks to access. So it's not quite ready yet, but it's going to be ready in the next couple of days. But give me a shout out. On Instagram, like check out my clips. Hold
on. I pulled it up for you. See if I can get this in the camera. Can you? There you go.
Oh, it
might be backwards, but the educator. All right.
Look at that handsome chap. Who's that?
Oh, he's beautiful. He's beautiful. All right, Ed. Well, thank you for doing this with me. Thanks for being the first guest on the podcast.
Of course, man.
I think it was a good first go. Obviously, got some kinks to work out with the internet giving out and everything, but I appreciate you.
Yeah, of course, man.